Okay, well, we will get started now. Well, welcome everybody to Roasting Origins Colombia. It's the second webinar in our Roasting Origins webinar series. This webinar is brought to you by Cropster, Ally Coffee, and our lovely panelists who we'll be talking to in just a moment. So, what is happening in this webinar and why are we covering what we're covering today? So, Ally Coffee and Cropster had this idea before that what would happen if we sent the same coffee out to multiple different roasters all over the world? What would their responses to the coffee be? What would their approaches be? And how could we learn from them? We thought that would be a fun webinar idea. So we did that and we liked it and it was great and we learned a lot. But then we had another idea. We said, well, what if we do the same thing, but what if we do it this time with roast consultants? And we thought that that would be a great idea. So we did it, and it was a great idea. So what we're going to do today is we're going to be talking to 4 roast consultants, and we'll be introducing them in just a little bit. And we're going to hear their perspective about these coffees. And we want to ask them what their opinions were, what data they found, what advice they have for those coffees and or for that coffee. And we're excited to ask them those questions. So anyways, what we're going to be doing today is first introducing the coffees. So, we'll introduce the coffee and then we'll introduce the roasting consultants. So first off, let me jump over to our next slide where we have a video that will introduce to us the coffee that we use for this webinar. And this video was sent over to us from Ally. First, we're going to watch this video, and then we're going to have Ricardo from Ally jump in and talk a little bit about his relationship with Finca Las Nubes. We'll play this here.
Hola, Ani, Daniel, Rob y Elena. Mi nombre es Claudia Zamoni y los estoy saludando desde nuestra Finca Las Nubes. Nuestra finca está ubicada en la vereda Agua Negra del municipio de Pitalito. Gracias a la oferta ambiental que tenemos en este lugar es que podemos producir unos cafés de una excelente calidad. Tenemos un choque térmico de las corrientes de aire caliente que vienen del Valle de Laboyos y que pegan con las corrientes frescas de la montaña en la reserva que tenemos acá alrededor de nuestra finca. Este cultivo de Borbón Rosado tiene 4 años y todos nuestros cultivos son sin sombra. Cuando recolectamos las cerezas, primero buscamos que la maduración sea idónea. Luego hacemos una medición de grados Brix, pues para determinar a qué proceso se va a enviar cada lote de café, sea lavado, honey o algún otro proceso, o natural. Después de que llega el café a la tolva de pesado, se flota para eliminar impurezas, granos defectuosos, brocas. Luego de esto se lleva a unas canecas donde lo dejamos fermentar entre 40 y 50 horas de una forma anaeróbica. Y para finalizar se saca al sol. Se colocan las camas africanas donde se demora entre 20 a 25 días en su secado. Les voy a explicar un poco el perfil de este café. Es un café con notas a chocolate, frutos rojos, frutos amarillos. Tiene notas a durazno, cacao, lima dulce. Tiene una acidez media alta y un cuerpo alto muy agradable.
All right, cool. So I'd like to bring in here Ricardo. Ricardo.
Hello, everyone.
There.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me. And this is a pleasure. You know, when we, like Taylor was mentioning, when we had this idea to do these webinars and we started with Brazil, and I'm Brazilian, so, you know, it was very near and dear to my heart. And then I guess if I could be, you know, a native of 3 different countries, I would say Brazil, the US, and Colombia. So I love these three countries equally. So Las Nubes farm, let's get to it, right? this is a very special project for me. I've been friends with Rodrigo, Claudia for quite a while, for 6 years. And about the end of 2019, Rodrigo came to me saying, hey, I have this property near one of my farms called Las Nubes. At the time it wasn't called Las Nubes, but I have this property near my farm, La Loma, and is going for sale. And I thought to call you and see if you would be willing to partner with me and a couple other guys, and then acquire this farm and do some really amazing stuff in it. So I thought about it, and I thought about it a little bit more, and that was like about 5 minutes. And and I decided to join forces with Rodrigo, Claudia, and then Vicente Mejia as well with ClearPath, and then Mark Trujillo from Hub Coffee. We all decided to join forces and then go for and then acquire this farm called Las Nubes. Now, Claudia is the boss there. She's the one that is running things and making sure things are getting done the way we want. But mainly, when you go and visit Las Nubes, which I had the privilege of doing it last year, you can see that Claudia has the handle of it, and the people that work at the farm loves Claudia and loves the way that she actually manages it and the way that she actually works with them. Her expectations are really high for the work at the farm. So it is a farm that, you know, we called it Las Nubes. It was a different name when we acquired it. We call it Las Nubes. The reason being is because it sits very high up there. It's about 1775 meters above sea level. And you can oversee, you know, if you guys have been, or if anybody has been to Pitalito, I think Daniel is from Colombia, he has probably been there, and Elena. Pitalito is down in the valley, and then around Pitalito, the city of Pitalito, you have all this different mountain range that actually connects in different parts. And Las Nubes sits on about 1775 meters on, I would say probably the south side of it, and then you can look from up there and you can see the city down. And then, you know, usually in the mornings, the clouds will really come down on top of the farm, and you can barely see anything because it's so high up there that it kind of covers the farm. The clouds cover the farm. And, but it's just like such a perfect place to really grow amazing coffees. And we are very fortunate for this opportunity. And Claudia is doing a fantastic job there. And we want to, you know, eventually when we're able to travel again normally, I would love to open the doors of Las Nubes farm for everyone to come and see what we're doing there. Currently, we have Pink Bourbon, we have Caturra, Geisha, Pacamara, and a few other varieties there that we're cultivating. And but this first year was the first full year we had the farm. We were able to do some really nice honeys, naturals on raised beds, and the quality of it, it's been better, way better than we expected, given that was the first year that we actually took over the farm, and then Claudia started managing it. So the work and the coffee that, you know, our friends here, the consultants, had the privilege to roast. It is a coffee that actually exceeded our expectations, being the first, you know, for being the first year that we produced this coffee. So Ally, you know, kindly partner with us in terms of the importation side of it. We have several roasters in the U.S. already that is roasting this coffee, and we are very excited for the years to come, given the quality that we got for the first full year that we had the farm, and so forth. So beautiful, beautiful trees, very healthy trees. Yeah, just the place is just a magical place. You know, I want to go there and spend, you know, 10, 15 days at a time when I can. Don't want to leave. It's just so amazing. And then working with people there, for example, we have the farm supervisor, Jaime. Is a guy that has been there for several years, been working with Rodrigo and Claudia since 2013, been in coffee his whole entire life. And the people that work with Jaime and Claudia, more hands-on in the farm, the passion and the commitment to be there and do the best work they can is just like unprecedented. I'm very pleased to see it, very proud to be part of the team, play a small part actually. But I'm excited to see what Las Nubes will do in the years to come with the team that we have in place. So that's a little bit of the background on the story of the farm, how the farm is so special. Yep.
I heard also you guys have the caturra from the same farm, right?
Correct. As a washed. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I know. Hey, I was talking to Jeremy about it today.
Yeah,
so I took the coffee to the Corvus.
Yes, it's a very clean washed caturra. It reminds me a little bit, Daniel, of a washed Kenya. Got some nice citrus notes, some black currant, very clean. But again, like I said, it's the first year that we had the opportunity to really, Rodrigo and Claudia and the team there, when we took over the property in the beginning of last year, we had a lot of work to do. And they started going in, head first. The farm was almost like to the point that was abandoned. The previous owner was in coffee, but he had several different other businesses that were doing really well. So the coffee to him was just like an afterthought. So there wasn't much of a care or really putting any effort into really taking care of the property and the farm. So when we took over, there was like a huge amount of work that the team there on the ground had to do to just clean. And then we hired this agronomist that has a really interesting approach in terms of like feeding the plants, like with organic input. So that alone really brought the trees back to where it should have been. And then the yields were like really awesome, way more than we expected, and the quality as well for the first year. So we're excited about it because I think with proper care and proper, management that we have now in place at the farm, that the next year is going to be even better than this year. And I was there in the middle of December. I was visiting the farm and I was looking at the flowering, and I was seeing some green cherries, small green cherries already, super healthy, super beautiful. So I think that we're going to have a really great year in 2021.
Awesome. Thank you, Ricardo. Cool. Well, now that we've been introduced to the coffee, let's get on to our consultants next here. First, we'll just talk about real quick why we're covering what we're covering today and what the approach is going to be today. So why we're covering this, I know at Cropster and I know at Ally as well, we get questions all the time from people asking, how should I approach this coffee? What should my rate of rise look like? What should my different phase changes look like and such? And though we may have some insight to those things, I'm not the best person to be answering those questions. And so we wanted to bring along people who could answer those questions well. So how are we going to approach this today? Well, we're going to talk to each of the consultants, ask them about their observations, their data, their strategies, their results, their advice that they would give to other people roasting the same coffee. And then at the end, we'll open it up for Q&A. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar. Those we'll collect those, and then we'll go through those at the end, and you can ask whatever you'd like to the consultants here. So cool. Well, starting off, we have Ann Cooper. Thank you so much for joining us. She has been a roaster for well over a decade now, and in coffee for, I think, twice as long as that. She has started her own company called Equilibrium Master Roasters, and you can find her at eqmr.com.au. You can reach out to her and you can do consulting one-on-one online with her, and she would be thrilled to do so. And she's up at any hour of the day. I think I was just talking to her before. I don't think I've ever had a conversation with her that was past 8 a.m. or before midnight. So she'll hang out with you no matter what. So don't be worried about the time restrictions. She'll do it.
No, not at all. Yep.
We're so glad to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes. Elena Lokteva, she is a coffee entrepreneur. She's a roast consultant, and she's a co-founder of Tourist Coffee and Fahrenheit Co-Roasting Project, and that's all in Colombia. So we had the Colombian-based webinar, so we had to have someone from Colombia. And speaking of someone Colombian, we have Daniel Mendoza, who is from Colombia, but now he's working with us here at Cropster. He leads our sales for the United States and Canada now. You may have seen him as a judge at SEA events in the past few years. He's done everything under the sun with the SEA. You may have even seen him with a camera in his hand. He's a man of many talents. He has a cool Instagram. Go follow him there. But yeah, he was a roaster for several years as well, and he's helped many people learn how to roast coffee and learn how to roast on multiple different types of machines, specifically in the Denver area. So we all very much love Daniel and appreciate him for being here. So thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, my
Then
friend.
last but not least, we have Rob Hoos, who is the author of Modulating the Flavor Profile of Coffee, One Roaster's Manifesto. He started his own business as well called Rob Hoos Coffee Consulting, where he also offers classes online. And you can find out more about the education that he offers at hoos.coffee, HOOS.coffee. So thank you, Rob, for being here as well. Cool. Well, now with those intros, we will get into the observations that our consultants had. So we will start first with Anne.
Okay. Again, thank you so much to Ally, Ricardo, and Cropster for having the opportunity to get involved in this wonderful project. And I think more than ever, seeing the video from the farm and hearing the story about everything, I think it really reminds us as roasters more than anything to always keep in mind about showcasing, you know, the coffees that we're roasting and giving them every opportunity to shine. And that of course then means doing our due diligence, whether it be as, you know, consultant roaster or whatever role we're playing in the industry, is giving these coffees a chance to just do their best. So for me, in terms of first exploring this coffee, like all of us, starting off with a sample roast. So the main goal with doing a sample roast, of course, is to assess the coffee and then get an idea about how it's taking on the heat, what kind of reactions, you know, it goes through, and all that kind of stuff. And then also too with a really nice green grading as well. So definitely the things that I think about in terms of approaching a new coffee is knowing the green, knowing the machine then of course I'm going to be roasting it on, and then knowing my profile or my flavor profile. So with knowing the green, doing the moisture readings, doing the density readings, giving myself an opportunity to really understand how do I start applying heat and energy to this particular coffee. So you can see just on my slide here, for those of you, you can see that with it being a natural process coffee, the color of the beans were already quite yellow and quite intense because of the natural process. We had a really interesting range of screen sizes to work with in the roasting process as well. And then from, I had a range of equipment to work with my moisture and my density readings. But in general, the moisture was sitting at like a mid 10 to like high 10% range, and sitting around that kind of 70, 71 kilograms per hectoliter in terms of density. So in terms of how to use that information, I always use the moisture content on how to start the roast, along with the screen size and my batch size. So that really starts to help me determine what kind of energy do I need to apply? How do I start activating the moisture in this bean? Remembering that water acts as a catalyst in terms of the heat transfer and starting the whole roasting process. And then I really use my knowledge about the density and the process more through and towards first crack at the end of the roast. So that's why I really target that information in my roasting. So then of course, using the sample roast to confirm what's going on. So we all found, and that was the beauty about having a group of other people to chat with. We were discovering how it moved through the roasting process in terms of color. Calling color change was really challenging. I've got a picture down here in the trier. It doesn't quite do it justice, but the paler beans were actually still quite bright green, along with the really sort of dark yellow that was happening with the beans that had more fruit coverage on them from the natural process. So that was a fun challenge. So understanding how to call color change. And then we sort of all discovered that the first crack event was quite quiet. So it was quite challenging in terms of calling that. So I definitely know that in terms of, I would advise roasters to, and I know the other consultants would do the same in terms of relying on other senses, in terms of relying on the sense of smell, watching, you know, things like the smoke coming off the center of the bean from the trier, along with other data points in the roast as well. So then I guess after exploring the green from the physical aspect, doing a sample roast, how do I take that to production? So definitely taking that knowledge about the way that it changes colour, the kind of very quiet first crack. Then I had the goal of doing an espresso roast. I roasted on a Mill City 1.5 kilo digital. So I was quite spoilt with the sample. We were sent just over 5 kilos. So I had the opportunity to do at least 4 or 5 roasts on the Mill City with 1 kilo batches. So knowing then with my Mill City, it does have quite a thick probe. So then I also then have in mind some data points that I want to work with on that machine. So I had a baseline 1 kilo profile that I could kind of use, you know, as a backbone for roasting this coffee. So then I had an idea about a starting temperature, approximately the kind of heat strategy that I wanted to start working with to start applying heat to this coffee. And then having an idea about approximately where I'd be calling yellow, and having a specific rate of rise at color change, and then having a specific rate of rise at first crack. And I also had an idea about my flavor profile. So I also wanted to work on about a 5-minute green to yellow first timing in the first phase, about 4 minutes in Maillard, and about 2.5 minutes after first crack for my espresso. And then of course, once we start roasting the coffee and seeing how it reacts and starts roasting, I then like, you know, just learn based on the feedback coming back from that specific coffee. So each roast was an opportunity to kind of slightly improve each time. I did find, obviously, calling yellow was quite challenging. So I did wait until the color was quite deep, a very deep gold yellow before calling it. And so when I called that color change, I would then start that the heat management onwards through to first crack. First crack was fun in the sense that there would be what we would potentially call like an outline crack, and then there would be a bit of a pause. And I think that's where, as a roaster, where you can start to feel that little bit of indecisiveness and you don't really kind of know what to do. So I tried to wait another 30 seconds or longer, along with smelling and using other data points along the way. Now you can see also I had a bit of fun. I've got a little bit of interference happening with my probe. So that's why my rate of rise curve, it has a lot of feedback at the moment. So I was really relying on my knowledge on how to drive the roaster. I was relying on the knowledge on the phase timings that I wanted to work on, as well as knowing I had a thick probe. So I had a specific idea in mind about what rate of rise I also wanted to be achieving at key parts in the roast. So then I would definitely say the potential to either over roast or under roast this coffee was pretty high, because you could make a potentially wrong call, especially either at yellow or crack, because you're starting some pretty important, you know, heat strategy movements from those points. But I was pretty happy with the espresso roast that I ended up producing. You can see here with my data points in terms of my color measurements, and I like to work on about approximately like 10 degrees in about 2.5 minutes after first crack for my single origin espresso roasts. And in terms of my color measurements, I do use the cupping grind size, because I'm looking for a delta spread of anywhere between, say, 8 to 10 points between the whole bean color and the outside and the inside color. So that's why my my measurements between whole bean and ground are quite close. But overall, as a taste, I was really enjoying, I mean, I love the body, I love the sweetness. Maybe it's because I'm in summer down here. I felt it was really reminded me of like sangria. And I was really enjoying the winey notes in the coffee. And also then the potential with the acidity. I definitely feel if we did accidentally under roast this coffee, the acidity would become quite intense, potentially verging on a little bit acetic or vinegary. And I know that, yeah, we all sort of like, you know, discussed that in terms of how would we manage that. And that's why I felt comfortable going a little bit longer and a little bit deeper, like through and after first crack, and really making sure those other two phases beforehand were a little bit on the longer side as well, to really help just stretch out and round out the intensity on the acidity. So we had every opportunity to enjoy the fruit and everything else that was present in the cup. And I had an espresso shot of it this morning. Maybe that's why I'm buzzing, but yeah, I loved it. I thought it was very fruit forward, very present in terms of the brightness. A wonderfully challenging coffee. Advice I would give to roasters is do your due diligence, do your measurements, understand the moisture and the density so you can plan your treatment of that coffee. Be wary, of course, of the natural process and mistiming any calls. And what would I do differently next time? I would probably maybe have a go at even going like the other consultants did, is go a bit shorter, you know, after first crack. Like, don't be afraid to go a little bit quicker. And yeah, so I had a really fun time with the coffee, especially because I had, with my data points on the screen, I had to really rely on watching the coffee quite a lot because I had that bit of interference with my feedback on the screen. Yeah. So yeah, so we'll be serving the coffee today at Project 281 in Brunswick in Melbourne. So if you want to come along and yeah, have a taste of the coffee, come on in. And thank you so much, yeah, to Ally and Cropster. It was a really, really awesome experience.
Oh, there we go. Can you see mine? There we go. Cool. So one thing, Ann, I wanted to ask you about, I know that you have on your screen, it says 60-second rate of expression there. And I know you're really big on that. I know that's something we talk about, and I just want to ask you about that real quick. I know that you had that kind of interference, but how does that 60-second rate of expression serve you best? I know that's kind of your thing. Maybe you can tell me about that.
It really helps me. Yeah, I really use it as a predictor. So I'm constantly thinking ahead. So if I know where I want to be at a certain part in the roast, so that really comes down to knowing your machine and knowing the probe that you're working with. So if I have a thick probe, I know that then I'm going to have specific data points and numbers that I'll be working with on that specific machine. So then I know then how to then think ahead and plan. So I guess along with, if I did have, you know, Cropster's predictor, the bar moving along at the same time, I would be using the number underneath the bean temperature, because for me, maybe I just need a quantification or a value to work with. So then I can think ahead and I say to myself, if I don't touch anything, where will I be in a minute's time? And I know that then that data point is connected to a physical event in the roaster. So it's really bringing together the data and the sensory. It's helping them work together. So in this case, I couldn't really 100% rely on watching the screen. I really had to check in with the coffee, and using my knowledge on how to drive the Mill City, I really then wanted to make sure that I could then move the coffee and I guess cook it at the same rate at which I wanted to cook it, based on how I knew how to drive the roaster. So, and that was with smoothing as well. And I'm still getting that really crazy feedback with my rate of rise. So I really just sort of had to dig in and, yeah, like I said, like it's definitely a test of wits, but that could also be because of my situation with my roaster as well. So that's a good thing, you know, for us all to be aware of. And I guess I've learned from experience, because I've been really lucky to be in, you know, truckloads of different, you know, roasting situations on different machines, different probes, and you kind of know when to relax and what to watch. And that's where I can really help roasters, you know, kind of understand it's okay if you've got this feedback on the screen, what else can you rely on to help you get the best out of this coffee? And, you know, really using your profile. And that's where I really love in terms of the phases and the timing, because it's really going to help you drive your roast. But you, of course, need to know your machine that you're driving as well. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions for Anne there? One of the things I was wondering about is the variation in screen sizes. If roasters are having variation in screen sizes, and that's the coffee that they have, they like the coffee. Clearly, you like the coffee yourself. What's the best way to mitigate any problems that could come as a result of that, or any obstacles?
Well, I guess, I mean, no doubt what we experienced just with the first crack, in terms of you've got small beans and large beans, like kind of like taking on the heat at different rates. So I guess it's just kind of learning how to understand what to work with. Like, when do you make the call based on those two beans, like just slightly developing at different rates. So whether you just kind of find a middle ground, and, you know, and I would really be using my data points to sort of help support me on that as well. And I'd really be making sure I keep my rate of rise in check. But yeah, it'd be really good to see, you know, hear what the other guys think with their experience with the variation in the screen size. But yeah, it would just be more in terms of how do you, what decision do you make? Because clearly it was affecting also the color change, but most importantly, it was that cracking point where we had a lot of fun trying to decide where to start working with the coffee from that point.
So that'll be a great question to ask the others.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, cool. Sounds good to me. All right, up next we have Elena, and I know Elena has some data on her end. She's going to share her screen with us. So we'll get her going there. And you can just take over, Elena, and just hit share screen, and that will take over my end here. All right, you might be muted, Elena, if you're talking.
Here we go. Right now, yes? You hear me well?
Yep.
Okay. Hello, everyone, again. And thank you for joining us here. Thank you for signing up, everyone who signed up so far. Thank you, Ally and Cropster, for organizing that and providing that opportunity to for that exciting challenge. And I can tell that it's been a double challenge maybe for me here so far, because I had to run really fast in with the approach to this coffee. But I'm always delighted and honored to work with the coffees from Las Nubes, from Claudia and her family. Actually, we've been here analyzing a few fresh crop samples, pre-ship samples from Las Nubes. And it's always exciting to be the first to taste those experiments that they're doing at the farm. And we've been working with them slightly over a year, as Ricardo has mentioned earlier. I could say like 2 harvests already. And I have always seen that that falls in flavor development and like more intensity in flavors, more unique varieties, experiments. So pink bourbon is definitely the one that can shine out this particular intrinsic aromatic flavors, and you know, the taste could be really different. And from my perspective, I had obviously, I cannot agree more with what Anne just mentioned, that one having that type of coffee or any kind of coffee on the table in front of them in their hands should definitely look into basic parameters like the moisture, the density, the screen sizes, where the coffee comes from. Obviously, it's very important lately, and I think that this is the very right tendency to know where the coffee comes from. That's why we, I think, took this chance and had a chance to listen to where the coffee comes from, the altitude, the conditions, how it's grown, like it's an unshade coffee. I can tell, and I can add a little bit that it's an organic coffee, but it's not certified, even though they do not use any pesticides. So there is like more of amino acids and much more components that you can play with to develop this interesting exotic profile. And in this case, for me, it was very important, also backed by the research that we're doing here with Miele, the German high-end domestic appliances manufacturer that recently set up here their showroom. And we've been doing some research on their equipment and the profiles that we can create for them to enhance the aromatic profile, the aromatics and the extraction yield for the coffees using their high-end equipment and grinders that they right now implement. So my focus in this coffee, after analyzing all the data that I got in my hands, I should say that my coffee was a little bit different from the coffees that my colleagues were using. It was a fresh crop, like super fresh crop, very recent batches. And I had a little bit different moisture, obviously. It was like 11, you can see here, down 11% with water activity hitting 66 and 70 grams per milliliter density, with the screen size not being a huge issue for me, because I found like anyways the range of the screen size that was present in this coffee in my sample was quite in the manageable range, like in between, 15, 16, 17. I got some beans below, but it was not that stressful for me. So I just decided to, knowing that coffee beforehand, I just decided to stick to a little bit lower temperatures and set some goals for me here that Cropster allows us to play with and to monitor after the roast is done. So my charging temperature was lower than I usually would go. And my roaster actually was like 12 kilo roaster, with my badge being 2.5. So there's a lot of room to gain that capacity and the energy to be transferred. And knowing that my moisture was 11%, I knew that I can use that moisture to transfer more heat to the core, and basically would have to manage my start temperature and the end temperature in the specific range. My temperature was like 160, and I didn't play much at the beginning with the airflow, because as I said, I had a lot of room for spinning the beans a little bit faster, and then a little bit slower, and then a little bit faster when I needed that, so that it gave me like a kinetics to more airflow as well. But I did play with the gas settings, and obviously having in mind that I have to be at a certain ROR for my yellowing and my first crack. I think we hit the same ROR with N, as far as I can see, so something very similar, 7 degrees per minute per 16 seconds. I also use that measure, that range, to have a better understanding of how the roast is going to develop, and offset a little bit the noise on the probe. As I said, it was like a double challenge for me. So I'm not 100% familiar with the roaster I was roasting at, but I think that at the end of the day, the result was very promising. I enjoyed the coffee. I did share it with already a few Q graders and like people who just enjoy drinking coffee. The focus was on aromatics, extraction, and on the unique flavor that this coffee can provide without like giving it a pass over to mute some exciting fruit forward flavors. The yellowing, I'm going to jump back to the yellowing because I do remember that everyone is just talking about this matter of these beans being not very equal in the yellowing in the yellowing phase. So I did expect the same thing, and I did have the same experience. And basically, it could be a matter of fermentation. It could be a matter of just ripening, the different stages of ripening and the different grade of ripening. But I don't think it. I think it brings a complexity to this coffee, and it definitely has to be detected properly so that you can manage your your modulation chart and your stages to understand where you at and where you heat the yellow, to know how many what is the percentage of yellowing, what is the percentage of green drying phase, and finally get this to your development time. In my case, it was 55 seconds, which I was targeting for, because the idea was to maintain all of these flavors and aromatics and volatile components. And I guess that this could have helped me a lot to manage that and to reach that goal at the end of the day. So I'm going to share some notes on the coffee that we got. Move a little bit this. It was very balanced, a lot of berries. I got the notes of blueberries, which is like very exciting and very promising for this kind of coffee, even though it's just a natural process. But I think that in this case, we may care about this coffee as something unique, and we may need a unique approach to that. And this coffee, to my mind, is very diverse, that can offer amazing outcome in espresso, in filter brewing, and it depends on what you're looking for, whether it's a rich body or whether it's a bright acidity. So I think that was my aim, and I was pretty happy about that. We're going to serve this coffee next week at the showroom of Miele with their automatic machines, and hopefully it's going to be fun. Everyone who's around is very welcome to join it, and very welcome to pass over and taste this coffee. Yeah. So my recommendation would be, eventually I would stick to what Anne just told, that you have to analyze and you have to be clear on the green grading, on the quality side of the bean, of the raw material that you get. I will add that it's great if you know the information about where the coffee comes from, like what are the conditions, when was this coffee harvested, and how it was processed. And then you can turn into experimenting, since it's a new trendy, very unique approach to fermentation, since they analyze a lot on Brix and pH and the temperature. So I think that the person that has this coffee in hands can have a lot of approaches, and all of them sticking to the basics of the roasting would result in amazing outcomes.
All right, cool. Thank you, Elena. Any questions for
Welcome.
Elena?
You can connect.
Cool. We will jump over to, let me share my screen. There we go. All right, next up we have, here's some photos that Elena had taken there. Here we go. Next up we have Daniel Mendoza. Daniel, how's it going? You want to tell us a little bit about your experience with this coffee?
Oh yeah, I haven't done this in a while, which is kind of cool to do it from a different perspective, I guess. It reminds me back in the day when I was working with a company that the head buyer or the green buyer brings you a coffee that you didn't know anything about. It says, hey, dude, figure it out. You know, this is a present for you in a way. So the way I did this was the same that I used to do then back then. Took the coffee, did a green analysis, sample roast, sensor analysis with my coworker back then. And this time I used my friend Shelby, which she knows a lot. So I wanted to get her feedback in the first sample that I did. Then another friends of mine, Servan, let me use the lowering, which thankful for Anne and Rob that told me that I can do a small batch in this machine, which I didn't know, which was pretty cool. So it was I did 2 5-pound batches. And then after doing that, I did 2 different roasts, and then I took these coffees all over the town, right? As soon as I got this coffee, I wanted now the barista's feedback, right? I got the roaster feedback, now the barista feedback to see, we collect all this data, and the idea was to go back and do another roast with the adjustments in order to make it work in a lineup. And then Jubilee, Little Owl, Queen City, Corvus, Huckleberry helped me out with the feedback. I wish I can do it to more, but I also work at Cropster, so I had a lot of costs. I couldn't take it all over the town. I wish it would be really cool. Oh, it's Sweet Bloom, but they got the sample late. But it would be cool if I can get Middle State, all of them, and to taste the coffee and give a feedback, because all they are roasters. And then after getting all that, make the adjustments of the roast. So that was kind of my approach. Instead of going deep in what to do with that kind of style of coffee, I just have to just do it, right? When you are a head roaster or a production roaster, you get the coffee, you just have to do it, and let the negative things of the coffee aside and just figure it out. Yeah, so that's what I did. Do you want me to share the screen now?
Yep, sounds good.
Perfect. So this is what I did. Why is not sharing? Perfect. So this is my sample roast with the Ikawa. I have a profile that I use. I usually don't dial in coffees with the Ikawa. I just figured it out when I was trying to mimic. I know it's Rob who's going to be mad at me or not. Maybe he said, "Oh, that's a good idea." But I used the lowering settings in order to try to match a profile, and I end up with this. And so far, it's working for me every time I try a natural or a type of fermentation process. So we did this, but before that, I did a green analysis. So I get the moisture reader, the density, and then we got like, I know there is not we call it la forma in Colombia. There is no for natural process, there is not a way to evaluate the green really well. So I just got the defects that I found, like full blacks and so on. But I usually do that with any type of coffee. I didn't add the screen size. I know I just wanted to just go ahead and do it and don't think about all these details that at the moment of a production roaster, we just have to do it. So I did this, and then Shelby helped me out with the sensor analysis of the sample roast. Here is where we cup, and to relate, which is beauty of coffee when people are constantly cupping coffees, is how calibrated you are. And you will see the other session that I did with the other roasters, that how calibrated you are when you are usually drinking coffees, sharing coffees between all of us, which is kind of cool. So with this information, we found quite a bit of Quakers, and Kevin from Hawk also mentioned it, like 20% of 100-gram samples were Quakers. So we get a lot of the dryness in this, usually in the production side than in the sample roast. So with this information, I decided I wanted to try to mimic this phase of the roast, and trying to give same idea on the lowering. I have just 2 shots, right? I couldn't I should have done 3 batches with 4 pounds, but I don't know, maybe the pressure and anxious to do it. And the same and I got noise at the end, which was like, I was kind of freaking out, but then just breathe and just let it go. And so I did 2 roasts, and then I give it to roasters. I call it a filter and espresso, and which I usually don't do that, but because I had 2 batches, I just wanted to do something completely different. So this is my first roast, and I wanted to do a little bit more aggressive in the beginning, and trying to get that acidity that I really like from the sample roast. So I wanted to hold that and call it filter, finish it a little bit with shorter development and shorter time, and get a little bit brighter color in the ground coffee. I'm using Espresso Vision color reader that is just for ground coffee. And Rob Hus did a really nice article about it. So I used that, and then in their website, they have like a comparison chart with Actron. And I was really happy with this. And then the second roast that I did, I just changed the way I start the batch. I charge way lower, but I use a little bit more gas, so I can actually finish in similar time by having a longer drying time to mute the acidity in order to have that. Because in Denver, we have the majority of these are lighter, and people like really fruity and bright coffees. So I wanted to see that on baristas, what they do with a brighter and non-brighter, how they face it in the espresso. And Little Owl did with the roast 1 and roast 2, they trying to match. I told them not to dial in, maybe 2 shots with AK, and just let me like a feedback so I can take it back and change my roast. But it was pretty cool. Everybody has good reviews on like the espresso side for the supposedly long drying, which it was the first the one that it was faster. It was a little bit brighter, like more like the pineapple, and most of them related chocolate with the astringency in the finish, like cocoa and that kind of stuff. So that was Little Owl helped me out. And then Jeremy also, they buy a lot of coffees from Ally, and most of this fermentation kind of process, he buys also for other coffee people in Colombia, Coffee Net or something like that. They have all these funky, super fermented coffees. So I was relying on him a lot because he has way more experience than me with this kind of coffees, and he really enjoyed them both. And he also matches what I was planning to do, which has lead acidity, but it has like the body, right? Like you want that in an espresso. And so then I collect all this information from Jeremy from Jubilee, Jeremy from Cropster, Josh from Jubilee, and Shelby. I should not add Kevin, but it's such I had Monday to today, so short time. And then you can see how calibrated all of us were. And we are copying the same different waters. I did it from my house. I use reverse osmosis and add minerals to it, different grinders. But when you are constantly training your palate, and I do it with tea, I still can be calibrated as with them. And the defects that we usually saw was for some of them, use of vinegar because it was a lighter roast. We got 91 Actron, and then also mouth drying. Mouth drying is coming from those Quakers, and so that's what kind of we did. And Queen City also helped me. They did on batch brew, and because they don't do pour overs, and they were on point as well. And they call the drying is more like in the chocolate or cocoa side of things. So yeah, that's what I try to do. And then with all this information, I will do changes more like a little bit more. I will just do one batch for both. I will not do just, this is for espresso and this is for filter. I will just try to have a balance of both, and maybe a little bit more develop with lower heat, because this kind of coffees with low density and so much organic material outside can take off or crash. So I will do just a little bit low heat at the end, a little bit longer than just like 1 minute and 15 or 1 minute and 10. So this is what I did. And pretty interesting, just within 2 shots, all the feedbacks that I got. And that's what usually roasters, in my opinion, should be doing, taking also opinions from baristas, right? They're supposed to be calibrated. They can give you a lot of feedback, so you don't sacrifice a whole batch and send it out to customers and then go back and dialing in your coffee. I think with machines like Loring or any others that you can do such a 4-pound batch in a 15 kilos, it's really cool. It can help you so much for less waste and so on. So yeah, I don't know, any questions? Happy to answer.
Yeah, Daniel, I really like your emphasis on, you mentioned you seem to have these protocols for how you approach each section of, analyzing a coffee. And I like that you just said, you told your bar, don't try and dial it in too much, just do it and then give me the feedback. Let's do the roast, get the feedback, which really seems to line up with an actual realistic production setting, because that's what you can realistically do. So I guess getting too into the details can maybe, get you off course, or maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning protocols. It's my favorite word, especially for roasters that have protocols in place, so you can have a vacation, right? Because roasters usually don't take vacation or get sick. But having these protocols, the same as baristas, they have them, right? So if you have a new coffee and then just tell them to dial it in, when they don't have a lot of information about the coffee, it's better to adapt that coffee to a workflow, right? And you get better and faster results, because then baristas stop freaking out, dialing in this coffee and then just giving ideas, but you just want a fast information, like copying, okay, what we do now, right? So when you have these workflows or these protocols, it's easier to get feedback as a head roaster, and then you talk to your production team or your quality control team. Let's figure it out. What should we do to reduce the mouth drying, right? In this case, Quakers. So we can do maybe a longer, lower heat roast, and so on. And yeah, so that was my goal, and that's what we used to do back then. And this is the best example, that when you have this and you have people that are calibrated, you get the best feedback, and then you can definitely change your roast and improve it to back to bar, right? So yeah.
I love that you said that, Daniel, like the idea that you don't want to make your baristas work super hard to make the coffee taste good, right? So looking at it from that perspective and working backwards, I think is awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think that, and to get better feedback and faster, right? Especially as a roaster, that you want to make sure that the first batch production and for the customers, it's already, you have all this data, right? Because it's all about data, and you collect data. And then next time you get a coffee like this, then you know what to do, right? And I think that was the best. And using different roasters was really, really cool experience. And they were super happy about it, because they didn't know the coffee. They didn't know I did a longer drying, shorter drying, nothing, right? And just coffee 1 and coffee 2, give me all you can. So yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Up next, we have Rob. Welcome, Rob. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I say ding to change the slides, like we're in an old audiobook?
Yeah, you can say that. That sounds good. That sounds good.
In that case, ding.
Okay, perfect.
I'm going to throw them in there. You'll have to listen very carefully.
I'm listening.
Metrics for me, I use the Cynar Bean Pro, 10.9% moisture content, which is a little higher. So usually when I see higher moisture content, what I'm expecting is for the coffee to do weird things. It doesn't necessarily mean I know exactly how that's going to play out, because there's an interaction between screen size and moisture content and density that kind of all comes to play. But usually if I see higher moisture content, I'm like, okay, I'm going to be wary that this thing might do something weird. And some of my colleagues touched on this before, But moisture does a few things. Before you hit boiling point, moisture does help carry heat energy into the bean a little bit. As soon as water starts to go above boiling temperatures, so above 100 centigrade or 212 Fahrenheit for those in the US, it really starts to slow the roast down because the water has to get pushed through phase change, which makes it go through the latent heat of vaporization, right? So it takes more energy to get water as a liquid at 100 C to transition to gas at 100 C than it does to heat it from 0 centigrade up. And so you're really dumping a lot of energy into the moisture. So the higher moisture content, like, yeah, it might get started kind of quick, but it's going to slow down mid-through. And we do see that happen a little bit here and there with some parts of the coffee where the moisture is really just playing with it. The other thing is I'm doing density. So my density reading looks a lot different than everyone else's because I like to do water displacement density readings. So I fill up a graduated cylinder, a 50 milliliter cylinder up to 40. I add coffee until it displaces at 10 milliliters, and then I know the weight of coffee that I had to add to displace the water to account for airspace. And so I ended up with 1,174 grams per liter, which would be, I think, 117.4 hectoliters, and if I'm doing the conversion right. Yeah, so. And then as Ann and everyone else touched on, rather large overall bean size with high screen size variation. And normally when I'm approaching a high screen size variation, what I've noticed is that you're going to get irregularities in terms of how they develop, both in terms of when they hit color, when they go through crack, as Ann mentioned, and so on and so forth. And so typically if I see high screen size variation, my goal is to slow down to allow them to all start to come up to speed together. So if I'm doing pre-blending or if I'm doing a coffee that has high screen size variation, that's usually what I'll look for. But I want to highlight one of Ann's favorite sayings and thank her for it. But taste is king, right? I didn't mess that up, right? Yeah, we're in the flavor business, is what you always say, right? And the coffee for me didn't taste as good with a longer roast than it did with a shorter roast. So I just kind of embraced that variation. And Elena, you mentioned this really well also, just this whole idea of like variability isn't necessarily a bad thing. Variability tends to lend complexity, right? And so, we think in coffee, if we could control all the variables, if we could make everything the exact same, then the coffee is going to taste better. But that's not always the case. And I think that if we made everything taste the exact same, it would actually be less complex and less interesting. So this is kind of one of those ones where, like, yeah, it did some weird stuff in yellowing, and the screen size was all over the place, but it is a delicious coffee. So, yeah, so it goes. There were, as Daniel mentioned, Quakers present in the finished product, high color variation during roasting, and as everyone has also mentioned, no audible first crack or barely audible first crack. All of my QA/QC was done with a 16:1 coffee to water ratio with water just off a boil, because by the time I fill it, my slurry temperature is at about 200 Fahrenheit, which is roughly 96 centigrade. Grind setting was about 50% in that 850 to 1,180 nanometers, 21% above and 29% below. So kind of in that general cupping range. And my water here is about 98 to 100 ppm. So it's a little lower than SCA standard, but better than normal Portland water in terms of our mineral content. So, ding! I just embarrassingly tried to click and it did nothing, and then I remembered. So I used one of my standard Akava profiles to check out the coffee, and while it wasn't perfect, it did clue me into some of the awesome flavors present in the coffee. So off this cupping roast, I got some crazy strawberry fruitiness. I got Jamaica for the floral characteristics, which is kind of like this amazing fruit punch floral sort of thing. It was very syrupy sweet, and the sugar browning tone was kind of in that nutty range, which could be linked a bit to the underripes, but so it goes. Here you can see right before my first crack, and I'm acting like you can see my pointer, which you can't. Right before first crack on this Akava roast, you can see we do have a bit of a dip down. I did see that showing up somewhat in the other roasts as well. Part of it is I've got the airflow change happening here, but the other part of it is I do see some of the energy getting absorbed right before first, and you'll see that pop up in one of my other roasts too. So, ding! My plan was to keep my development time short, very, very similar to Elena. I ended up with about a 60-second development time, and that is because with natural, something that a friend of many of us, Joe Morocco, used to always say to me is, with natural processed coffees, you have to pretend like they're kind of roasted already a little bit. And so you usually end up ending lighter, and you usually end up roasting with shorter development times. And I feel like that's just really, really good down-to-earth advice for most natural processed coffees. Generally, compared to my washed equivalents, I'm using shorter development times and lower in temps or lower colors. So nice short sample roast development time. Fruity flavor was great, so I'm going to follow that in my production roast. My final roast color, I do want to keep it low to keep sweetness. One of the things I'm really sensitive to is I don't like acidic chocolate. And so if I have acidity, if I'm going like a little bit of a darker roast color, I tend to match that with a longer development time because sour chocolate is not one of my jams. If I'm going chocolatey, I'm kind of going all that way. If I'm wanting fruitiness, I'm going more that direction. Naturals tend not to need to roast to such a high end temperature. They have a tendency, as Anne mentioned, to get too dark too quick, and this one in particular I think follows that. So I was aiming for around 70 agtron whole bean and around 109 agtron ground. For my ground agtron, I am using an espresso grind setting. For those of you who have a niche 0, I am using 15. So just to calibrate. And I was using the Lightells and Espresso Vision for my color meter readings. Experiment with faster and slower roasting styles to see what happens with the floral notes and how those transform. Generally speaking, getting to first crack faster tends to give me more florals. Getting to first crack slower tends to emphasize savory characteristics, which can be very desirable, such as caramels and nuts and stuff like that. But sometimes if you go too far, you end up with like meaty, savory, ding. Almost got you sleeping. So this is my first batch. I did it on the US Roaster Core. I had a 1.5 kilo batch and then two kilo batches. After I did this batch, I made a post about Instagram telling people to come visit us here, and then also asked if I should do it on my US Roaster Core or my Loring Nighthawk, the 7 kilo. And everybody said do it on the 7 kilo, so I did. But the first one was on the US Roaster Core. So here's the US Roaster Core. You can see on the cupping there was a little bit of roast character, some effervescence, strawberry, rhubarb, and some vegetal characteristics. After a few days, the roast character and vegetative character were both there, so it was both like slightly under and slightly over simultaneously. And I think a lot of that had to do with how fast I ended up getting into color change on the USRC. It was faster than I had intended, and I slowed down in the middle. And so even though I got to first crack at a reasonable time, I got to color change rather quickly. And I think that that variation caused me some heartache in this particular instance. So, you know, it had nice characteristics still: watermelon, strawberry, butter pecan or butterscotch, floral, juicy, all that sort of thing. 12% weight loss. I was at 66.3, whole bean 103.1 ground, which gives me a 36.8 delta spread on those. On the roast vision, I was hitting 24. Once again, at an espresso grind setting. But with all this data, basically what I saw was I need to bring that roast character out. I don't want it. And I also want to reduce the vegetal characteristics. So I want to make sure my development time hits just right and everything works together. So my goal was, when I transitioned to the Loring, to make sure I didn't get too dark or go too quickly. So ding. Oh, here's some of the variability that we were talking about earlier. You can see we've got brown and green right next to each other. This is on one of the roasts, ding. This is on a slower roast, so I did do a slower roast also, and once again still had that rather large variability. So I found that slowing down to what I would consider a normal roasting time instead of a faster roasting time didn't really bring me any change in terms of color variation, so it's just a coffee thing. And because the flavor was okay, and as Anne says, we're in the business of flavor, I decided that that would be fine. I would probably stick with my faster roasting, but we'll get to that later. Ding! So my plan, second part, switching to the S7 because people asked me to. Keeping development time about the same. Around a minute was great. Roast to a lower end color because I had gone a little too dark in my first go. So tried to do that, and then I tried to avoid the irregularities in roast by being careful about heat application. I did push yellowing back a little bit. However, there was still quite a bit of irregularity, but as I found out, that doesn't really matter too much. So ding. 20% capacity batch in a Loring S7, charged to about 280 Fahrenheit, which is around 140 centigrade. After having, brought it down low enough temp, came up at 60%, nice turn down, everything went pretty smoothly. And this one really hit all the marks for me. My weight loss was up around 13%, so 1% higher weight loss than the previous batch. And even though I had 1% higher weight loss, my colors were lower. And so I achieved somehow getting more development and lower colors, which was kind of my goal. So as you can see, 69.2 right there near 70 and 107.2 within striking distance of the 109 target I had. 24 on the roast vision, 38 delta. And this one was the one that I ended up liking the most of all of them. Strawberry syrup, hazelnuts, vanilla, floral, once again, Jamaica. There was a bit of an off character in the first time cupping it, but I think that I had too many unripes in that first cup, or too many Quakers, I should say. But later tasting it, strawberry, vanilla, rhubarb, caramel, tamarind, hazelnut, it was very juicy and had a lot of structure to it. And this is my jam. This coffee is really, really delicious. And by keeping the end temperature low enough, even though I have such a short development time, I didn't get that overly acidic characteristic because the roast level and the acidity were playing really, really nice together. So I felt pretty happy about that. Ding. Plan for attempt number 3. Even though I liked my second attempt, the third attempt was to try and slow it down and see if I could get the color variation to go away. Spoiler alert, I did not. But that was my goal. So once again, wanted to hit the same basic color, same basic development time, but push first crack back. So let's go to the next slide here, take a peek. And so you can see here, first crack hit at about 9 minutes instead of 8 minutes. Development time was 1 second shorter, which is pretty insignificant. My color was pretty much spot on where I was the last time. The delta was only 0.8 difference. Roast vision was the same color meter reading. This one, I have to move my face and everyone else's faces to see. Heavier flavors, praline or caramel kind of in the front end. Still strawberry, but there was more bitterness to it. So I'm going to say strawberry balsamic with caramel reduction or something like that. Sounds good, right? This did not improve anything for me. The faster roast was still my preference. And so this is one of those things where sometimes you get an idea like, hey, let's try this. And roasting isn't always a linear progression. You might try something that you think will help the coffee and it doesn't. And you realize that you maybe hit the potential you were aiming for in an earlier batch. So my second batch was actually my favorite as opposed to this one. I think this might be the end of my slides too, but we can see. Yeah, kind of looks that way.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, that's kind of what I got about my journey with this coffee. So,
thanks, Rob.
Yeah.
Any questions from Rob there, from our panelists?
I just have a question to Rob. Can you, with your color measurements, can you just like help us understand the thought process behind using more of the espresso grind? Because that's something that I've, haven't really had a really good, clear answer on. So yeah, I'd be really keen to hear why the finer grind versus, using more like the cupping grind or the, more the 800 micron, kind of size.
For sure. Yeah. So my perspective is this, that, the whole bean color is the exterior, right? And we don't really have a true interior color reading. So the ground color reading is an average. And so the finer that you grind the coffee, the more of an average of the whole coffee you see. So there's a really good correlation where like the finer you grind, the lighter the color is going to end up. The coarser you grind, the closer it's going to be to your whole bean color. And so basically all I'm trying to do is see the most averaging possible to see what the delta would be if everything was like basically obliterated and mixed together.
Thank you.
Cool, thank you.
So one of the things I wanted to do, and we'll get to questions here, but I actually have pulled up each of your roasts and I put them in the roast compare report here. So, and you can kind of see on the right side, we have Rob, Daniel, Ann, and Elena, and they're all color coded there. But just interesting to see the variation in the modulation chart and in the roast curves themselves. Yeah, pretty cool. All right, let's check out our chat. Any questions in there? I know I saw one earlier. Yeah, there we go. So one of the questions we had from Sebastian earlier was, have you felt that it's more difficult to roast coffee with long hours of fermentation because its crack is faster than wash coffees and then they can burn? And if you want to take a stab at that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't necessarily know that the crack is going to be faster, but the crack is going to be weirder, right? A lot of the experimental process coffees, and y'all can jump in if you have any thoughts on this too, that they don't crack very loud. Most of the ones that I've been playing around with, like the more experimental the process, it feels like the quieter the cracking and the more difficult to ascertain when it's going to happen. And there's no like one size fits all either. I've worked with clients that have some incredibly expensive, amazing, like wild experiment coffees, and some of them do great with a faster roast like this one did. Some of them don't. Some of them work a lot better with a slower roasting style because they get papery or cardboardy when you go too fast. And it's just one of those things where it's so hard and it's such not a one size fits all when it comes to the coffee.
And any thoughts there? I saw you nodding your head.
I would just agree. Just my experience with the longer fermentation coffees do tend to, have that sort of much quieter crack, especially. But then I was also kind of thinking in terms of maybe some Kenyan coffees, sort of learning recently in terms of things that can happen if the drying patios are full and a coffee is waiting to go out onto the patio. Those beans are going back into water to stay, to be like sort of like kept fresh, so to speak, while they're waiting for the patio. So, and I don't know about you, but when I hear Kenyan, I go, oh, early crack. And whether that's, due to the process they've been through as well. So yeah, it's kind of each to their own sometimes. Yeah, it's interesting.
Got another question from Marcelo. Do you normally start roasting on low gas? Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Depends.
For me, that's very much batch size related. And so determining, obviously, and also in terms of the property of the green. So if I've got a low moisture coffee, a small screen size and a small batch size, I'm most definitely going to be starting on a much lower gas. I also have my checkpoints in place along the way as well. I have a goal for my turning point. I have a 3-minute momentum checkpoint, and that's to sort of frame me up and get me in line with, I've then also got a profile in mind about where do I want color change to happen? How long do I want to spend, in Maillard, and then depending on what I'm doing after first crack as well. So yeah, for me personally, they're my 3 key things is moisture content, screen size, and batch size will help me determine.
Yeah, and it's a lot to do too with the roaster you're on. So like my US roaster core, I'm going to smack it with gas straight away if I'm doing like a 2 kilo batch size and my 3 kilo. Same with the Loring, if I'm doing a larger batch size, I'm smacking it right away with gas. Whereas other roasters, I'll do soak on. So it's really.
Yeah,
Yep.
like for me was for the first time doing a Loring. Anna says you can do it without soaking. I was really scared, this machine. I still learning a little bit more about them, and that's why I started with lower gas. But I can see after all the feedback that I got, I will try to do. We hired started a little bit earlier in gas with such a low batch size for this 15 kilo. But it's also what Rob says, it all depends on your machine, how much you know about it, how it's going to behave
Yep.
with the coffee that you're using.
Yep.
Elena?
I was going
are you muted
to
now?
just,
Okay, cool.
yeah, I'm fine now. I just wanted to add that it might be also the density, and because my first crack was really pronounced, and even though it was like really kind of challenging to hear it, since the machine is quite big and the batch was quite small, but I didn't experience that that situation with the crack. I don't know if it could have been the moisture content, even though I see that Rob has similar moisture readings, and the density is pretty high. But yeah, for some reason it could be just the matter of the molecular structure of the bean as well, or the way we transfer the heat to the bean, because like could be that from my point of view could be just like for this specific bean that cooking longer may produce this impact, and that's why probably I didn't have that for my roast, since it was like a pretty faster one. So yeah, so I think that it could be also an issue, because we do receive here lots of coffees, as Daniel mentioned. We do work with a lot of coffees that has prolonged fermentations and longer fermentations and like more aggressive fermentations. Generally, for me, in my experience, the denser the bean, could be the quieter the first crack, the harder to open up that bean. And if it's a smaller size bean, then it's harder to open it up and like hear this pronounced crack of the vapor going and breaking the walls of the bean. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Looks like a couple more questions here. What tips would you suggest for roasting larger production batches? Asks Clay.
In terms of, I guess we'll ask for a follow-up on that one.
Yeah, sounds good.
Like bigger production batches of this coffee, or of a different coffee like this coffee, or?
We'll wait for Clay to follow back up on that one. We have another one from David. How do you determine the values on the temperature between probe and return? One on lowering before charging. Any matter about moisture, density, and water activities? Okay.
That one's asking specifically how to charge on a lowering, from what I gathered from what you said.
Yep.
I mean, on a lowering in particular, charging is going to be more determined by the batch size and your roasting style more than anything. So if you're wanting to roast really, really rapidly, you're going to have a higher charge temperature than the machine suggests for the batch size that you key in. Whereas if you want to roast a slower style of roasting than like hitting crack around 9-10 minutes, then you're probably going to want to have a lower charge temperature than the recommendation by the machine. So it is kind of dependent on a lot of different things there. I mean, for the most part, on the lowerings, you don't need to be afraid. You can go all the way up to 250 C for your charge temp and be fine without scorching or anything, which is 499 Fahrenheit for those at home. But then, you can also go incredibly low down to 260, 280 Fahrenheit, which is around 140, 145 C. In terms of your low end, to do small batches, to have plenty of control. So it's very dependent on that.
So for coffees like this one, Clay said, if you're trying to max out your batch size, what things should you be keeping in mind?
Well, me personally, because I do quite a lot of full batch sizes on my P12. I mean, it's about knowing your probe, knowing your data points. And so knowing then obviously the properties of the green, and then you've got to frame up the energy appropriately in your system so you can introduce heat at the right time, at the right level. And of course, bearing in mind what kind of drum do you have, what kind of burner do you have, all that kind of stuff. And then again, I'm quite strict in terms of I'll have a 3-minute momentum checkpoint. So if I don't get to where I need to be by 3 minutes, if you're already at full gas and you've got nowhere else to go, you could potentially consider starting again, because you are at a point in the roast where you don't put yourself through the pain of a slow roast if you don't have to, especially on full batches. Just depends on, know your probe data points, plan your roast, plan your rate of rise, make sure you're connecting your data points to the physical change in the roaster so they can work together. And so you can really better manipulate the energy in the system and the coffee as it's giving you feedback with your rate of rise. That's probably the biggest things I've learned with my bigger batches is, knowing I'm at the right amount of energy at the right time, and so I can read the feedback a lot better and then manage the energy in the roaster a lot better. But it does depend on, do you have the right amount of power coming into your machine? Are you able to heat it up quick enough, hot enough? Yeah, system dependent. Know your probe, know your data.
Yep. Know your
Yeah,
probe.
I don't know, what do you guys think?
Know your probe. Yeah.
Yeah, like you have to know the machine, as we all know. And when you are doing small batches like I did, the idea is that I should know what a full batch looks like, right? Doing a small batch with this new coffee just give me an idea how it behaves. And so it's just, and with loadings, it's really easy to translate to a bigger batch and changes. And another thing that I couldn't do, that I was gonna plan to do it, is with the feedback, I can design a profile with Cropster that it can mix both of them, and it can give me an idea to roast the full batch. So that's like the protocol to do it. And I wish I'd done it so I can actually show it. But yes, you know your machine, and you know how a full batch will behave with the characteristics of density and moisture and so on. That's what I think.
It gives you a couple different questions too that kind of flow off that. And one of them is, if you're buying a coffee that you plan to use large capacities in your roaster because you're going to sell a lot of it, you have to kind of decide whether you want to be careful how you're profiling your samples. Because if you're doing your product development in such a way that you know you'll never be able to roast a full batch, you might fall in love with the flavor of a coffee that you're never going to be able to reproduce. So on the one hand, it's important, like if you're like, I'm going to max my machine out when I'm roasting this, it's probably best not to get your heart set on a really, really fast roasting style, because most machines just aren't going to be able to do that, with some exceptions. So it's probably better to think like, okay, I should probably do it this way. And then one of the bits of research that I love from a mutual friend of all of ours in Copenhagen, Morten Munchau, he did a research paper that showed the correlation of flavor, and it really kind of gave like a hierarchy to what's most important and what's least important. And most important is end color, whole bean and ground. If you're matching end color, whole bean and ground, you're probably 80% of the way to matching flavor for your customers. Then was development time, and then was when you hit first crack, and then was everything else. And so if you do really love a coffee, you do have a decision tree that you can kind of go down to say like, well, I want to land as close to the sample as I can, but I'm going to be doing production batches, so I can't roast as fast. Well, if your whole bean and ground color are the same, your development time is the same, then you're most of the way there, and it will taste a bit different than your sample because you're probably going to have a later first crack when you're doing larger batches. But you can get the majority of the way there in terms of planning your production roast style, just by working backwards that way.
Thanks, Rob. Last question here that we have is a question about drum speed or revolution speeds. Are there any situations where you are adjusting drum speed, whether that be because of different batch sizes, first or last roast of the day, screen size, etc.? Are there any recommendations, or is that usually a fixed parameter for you guys?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I did the change in the drum speed for my curve. And I had the situation because I wanted to probably get more like when you start the roast and you charge the beans. In this case, I used slower drum rotation to 55, and then I increased it in order to get more two things like the radiation, or like the conductive transfer of the heat, and also since there was more space in my drum at that moment, since the batch was lower, I had also more air circulating in the drum, which helped me also. I think in this case it was a good way of instead of using more airflow, using the drum speed and kind of accelerate this conduction and convection. So I guess that it could be a matter of applying it, and then there are certain situations that definitely you wouldn't do that, you wouldn't go for that, since it's a more it could be a drastic, probably drastic turn to affect the scorching and tipping, and that what can produce the defects on the bean surface. So yeah, several situations and different outcomes could happen, but there's a lot to play with the rotations as well, if it's possible.
Any other comments there on batch, or excuse me, on drum speed?
I would take the approach, for me, setting your drum speed is more just setting up your roaster how you like it. In terms of like, faster drum speeds will usually give you faster roasting times, provided you're not creating a centrifuge sort of situation, because you get more convective heat energy transfer, which is quite a bit more efficient at transferring heat to the beans. In my experience, changing drum speed can change thermocouple coverage, which can change your readings a bit. So I usually just recommend that people not ever mess with it. So set it, and then I joke that people should put it in a lock box so that nobody can meddle with it. But that being said, you can do some really fun stuff by changing your drum speed. Just in a production environment, it's usually not what I would recommend personally.
Gotcha. A few more questions here we can go through. Let's see. It seems all profiles rate of rise are around 7 to 8 Celsius, even with different approaches. So is this a rule or milestone? I see. Just looking at all four of the roasts that we have up here, they kind of taper off at around that mark. Any thoughts there?
I guess for me, I use that as a guide in terms of making sure I've got enough energy to get to where I need to be, like in terms of planning the rest of the roast. So it's a goal, it's a milestone. It's definitely, it's that keeping the energy in the coffee, in the system. So it's a really great way. It almost like also helps to show you how to manage your system in terms of driving it as well. If you have these specific rate of rise rates, these goals, along the way. So if you're always kind of just always heading into first crack too slow, and you're not giving yourself a chance to see it in terms of, oh, damn, I had 5 degrees instead of 7. Why am I always losing energy? Why do I feel like I'm scrambling after first crack and it's just not working? It gives you the confidence to know you have to hold the heat so you've got the right amount of energy to keep on finishing and get to your end goal. So, and I do have specific rate of rise rates at first crack for different roast levels. So it's easier to manage, for me personally, so I can manage those end, flavor profile goals, and specific end temperatures as well. So, it's just, for me, that's just how, it's just a kind of a rule that I use for my single origin espresso roasts anyway. I'm not sure about the other guys.
I usually don't relay moisture that much. The reason why is in my career as a roaster, never got a moisture reader. Just in the last, and other thing that I learned when I was working with some green coffee people in Colombia is that moisture readers need to be calibrated really often. So I never rely on those, but I know that it's a lot. Sustainable Harvest is doing a really, Jimara is doing interesting project relating moisture and water activity to the roast. But I never had the chance to do it. So the cheapest option was the density, and that for me has been the most. I always rely on density. That's kind of my point of view.
I'd say because we sort of, I guess we've jumped to the next question from Melissa. A really cool thing I was taught when I was roasting at Dallas Brothers, I have to give Byron Holcomb a shout out to this. He taught me how to chew on the beans in terms of, instead of not having the moisture content, it was basically my mouth was the moisture content reader. So we would chew it and we would practice all the different beans, and you get really good at working out in terms of the way the beans like chew and crack and different levels of if they give some resistance or how they break. Yeah, you'd be surprised how good you get. Obviously be careful with your teeth. Yeah, we got really good at practicing chewing on the green. So yeah, that was a bit of a fun, big thing that we used to do at Dallas Brothers with Byron. So yeah.
So next time you go to Roasters Guild, you have to do a class of that.
Yeah. We got a new Ann Cooper quote to add to the list. Chew your green. I love it.
Yeah, that would be really cool to learn.
That's
To
a
be
new
honest.
quote. All right.
Yeah. Sorry, I jumped into the question. Sorry about that.
Oh no, it's perfect. Melissa seemed to be excited by that method. I think we all are. All right.
And
Even
there's moisture meters that only cost around $300. The Moisture Mac, which the SCA used to sell, I don't know if they still do, but you know, it gets you close.
Yeah.
It's perfect, but it is something that is worth having, especially if you're going to store your own green coffee for any length of time, or to verify that the coffee arrived at around the correct moisture content. Because you can ask your importer as well, like Ricardo, you know, Ally gives out this information very easily. So you can ask your importer, but you know, a $300 investment to protect thousands of dollars of product is probably a good call.
Yeah, and that's great. And also in terms of storage, because if you know how the coffee arrives, like for us down here in Australia, you know, there's always, you know, often a month delay on the promised shipping time. So by the time the coffee gets here, sometimes it has changed quite significantly from, you know, when it's shipped at origin. So if it does arrive lower, then we know how to start, you know, storing it and keeping it in check, and whether we have to use it quicker than intended as well. So yeah, those moisture readings are really handy from that perspective. That's a great point, Rob.
cool. Well, unless we have any other comments or new ways to chew coffee, then we will end it there. That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Ann and Daniel and Rob and Elena. Thank you so much. Ally Coffee, thank you so much to you for providing the coffee and just managing all those logistics. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody who joined. If you want to catch this again, you can on YouTube. So we'll be posting this ASAP, and you can go and watch it over and over again. So anyways, on behalf of Cropster, Ally, and the crew here, thank you so much, and we will see you later.
Yeah,
Yes.
ask
Thank
Taylor for the
you.
samples so
Bye,
all
friends.
of you can taste it.
So Project
Thank you.
281 in Brunswick, come and have a taste.
Awesome.
Also, if you're near
Gracias.
Oregon, you can stop by my garage.
Yes.
I sent all the coffee to Cropster, so ask them for it.
Awesome.
All right.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thank
brother.
you. Thank you, Ricardo.
Thank you.